Hello friends, and welcome back to this program, Books of the Book. My name is David Rodriguez, and I'm so happy that you are taking this time to join us in this Bible study. And we're studying the Gospel of John. And today we're picking up on chapter 18, and we're talking about the cross. So if you have a Bible near you, I invite you to open it to chapter 18 and join us in this Bible study. And I have been blessed to know that as I read more and more, that there is a deeper message that God wants us to learn. And with us is Dr. John Paulin. He is a Bible scholar. He is the Dean of the School of Religion in Loma Linda University to join us in this study. And I keep telling him that I have been blessed again. And the more I study, the more I learned. And Dr. Paulin, you know, the last program we talked about chapter 17, which is the prayer of Jesus, and he's talking about, he's praying for his disciples, he's praying for himself, and he's also praying for what you call the second generation, or you and I. Now, let me ask you a question as we go into chapter 18. Is the cross the only revelation of God's character, or how does God reveal himself to us other than a cross, if so?
Okay, that's a good question. We want to be clear on that. I'm not in any way suggesting the cross is the only revelation of God. God reveals himself in many ways. He reveals himself through prophecy. He reveals himself through history. He reveals himself through nature. Mm-hmm. Jesus even says, inasmuch as you've done it unto one of the least of these, my brethren, you've done it unto me. In other words, we can see glimpses of Jesus even in the behavior of others. Certainly the life of Jesus is a very important revelation of what God is like in the Gospel of John. But what John is saying is that the cross is the clearest. That's where the glory is seen. The name, the character of God is most clearly seen there on the cross. So let's keep the focus there. It's not only on the cross, but the cross does it perhaps more clearly than anywhere else.
Okay, and so today we're now studying chapter 18.
Now we're moving to the cross.
We're moving to the cross. Mm-hmm. So tell us the setting here. Where are we at this point?
Okay. Well, in the Gospel of John, the cross is in both chapters 18 and 19, and because there's so much in there, we are going to divide those up into two programs. So today we're focusing primarily on chapter 18. And the story begins in a garden, mm-hmm. and it ends in a garden. Now it's interesting. We spoke earlier in this series about the Hollywood version of Jesus, how we pick and choose from all the Gospels and create a composite picture that is excellent for people to understand and to follow, but it sometimes blinds us to some of the interesting details. And that is that Jesus' agony happened in Gethsemane. But it doesn't say in Matthew, Mark, and Luke that it was a garden. John doesn't mention Gethsemane, but he does tell us it happens in a garden, mm-hmm. at the foot of the Mount of Olives, you see. So we know where it is, we know the name of the place, we know what it was like, but we piece that together from three different Gospels. So John seems to want to make the point that the cross starts in a garden and it ends in the garden. The tomb Jesus is buried in is in a garden. Now the story is broken into three parts in chapters 18 and 19, and they don't divide neatly at the chapter line. Verses 1 to 27 of chapter 18 are the first part, where you have the arrest of Jesus, his indictment before the Jewish priests. Then in chapter 18:28 through 19:16, we have his trial before the Romans, presided over by the governor, a judge named Pilate. And then in 19:16 through the end of 19, you have the crucifixion itself, and then the death of Jesus, the verification of that death, and his burial. Mm-hmm. So it's sort of a fairly neat division into three fairly equal parts. We'll look at the first part in this program and as far into the trial before Pilate as time allows. This is the section, chapters 18 and 19 are the section of the Gospel of John where there's the most connections with Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So the story of the cross is quite familiar in those Gospels as well. But that makes this perhaps the most fun part of the Gospel of John, because we can see the things that John adds to the story, like the garden piece, and then the things that he doesn't mention, that are mentioned in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So the richness of this story is particularly in the fact that we can see how he does it differently than Matthew, Mark, and Luke do. I think a particular emphasis in the story is what I'd call the irony of Peter, Pilate, and Jesus. Because Jesus is contrasted with these other two. One of them is a Jew, the other one is a Gentile, and both of them make some serious mistakes in this section. Both of them are basically looking at their own personal comfort. They're seeking to avoid pain, embarrassment, loss of job, loss of reputation. So the behavior of Peter and Pilate is motivated by the immediate situation. The result is long-term consequences that are devastating. Jesus, on the other hand, takes the long view, allowing himself to be pinned on the cross. There's nothing pleasant about it. There's no immediate gratification whatsoever, but he does that because of the long-term results. I think one of the big problems in politics today is that the people want the leaders to make short-term decisions. They're complaining, unemployment's up this month, do something about it. Well, anything you could do about it would probably take 2 or 3 years to really kick in, you see. So somehow we are all wired to this immediate gratification thing. You know, have it now, you know, have your cake now and have the meal later kind of a thing. And it is because Jesus and God take the long view that the cross is a big piece of things. So in John, nowhere else is this contrast between the way Jesus makes decisions and the way Peter and Pilate do. Pilate, by the way, is in a real sense the other star of this story. He plays a central role in the Gospel of John, much less so in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So let's go to that first section, verses 1 to 27. Jesus is arrested in the garden. And then he's brought before Annas, who is one of the high priests, and we'll have more to say about him a little bit. Then there's a picture of Peter in the courtyard, along with the beloved disciple, who only appears here. And then it goes back to the trial before the high priest, as it says, and then it goes back to Peter in the courtyard of the high priest. So you have this kind of a double stage back and forth in much of this section. In Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the trial happens before Caiaphas, who is the high priest. Only in John is the trial before Annas. And John makes clear that there's a trial before Caiaphas, but he only mentions it in passing. He doesn't describe it. That's already done in the other Gospels. But he zeroes in on this trial before Annas. And there's an interesting background to this. You see, Annas was the high priest back at the beginning of Tiberius' reign. But for whatever reason, he displeased the Romans. The Romans removed him and put Caiaphas, his son-in-law, I believe, in his place. The Jews never truly accepted this because for them, a high priest was to serve for life. So when the Romans removed him, Annas retained the moral authority before the Jews. He was the real high priest. Caiaphas never quite got that respect from the people, but Caiaphas had the power of Rome behind him. So that meant the decisions that Caiaphas made had to be obeyed. Annas could only persuade. Caiaphas was the one who really had the power. And so Annas is brought in here because if he can persuade them to do away with Jesus, then Caiaphas and Pilate can act on it. So he still has the power of persuasion, but he no longer has the position.
Yeah, and then I can imagine them both working together because Annas was the father-in-law of Caiaphas.
Yeah, assuming they got along well. The fact that they hold the trial separately might suggest that that wasn't so.
Well, that's a
great.
good observation.
Yeah.
But, so unfortunately, we won't be reading all of the verses today because it's time in such a long chapter. But where are we reading?
Why don't we read the garden story in John chapter 18 and verses 1 to 11.
Okay. When Jesus had spoken these words, he went out with his disciples over the brook Kidron, where there was a garden which he and his disciples entered. And Judas, who betrayed him, also knew the place, for Jesus often met there with his disciples. Then Judas, having received a detachment of troops, and the officers from the chief priests and Pharisees, came there with lanterns, torches, and weapons. Therefore Jesus, knowing all things that would come upon him, went forward and said to them, "Whom are you seeking?" They answered him, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus said to them, "I am he." And Judas, who betrayed him, also stood with them. Now when he said to them, "I am he," they drew back and fell to the ground. Then he asked them again, "Whom are you seeking?" And they said, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus answered, "I have told you that I am he. Therefore, if you seek me, let these go their way. That the saying might be fulfilled which he spoke, of those whom you gave me, I have lost none. Then Simon Peter, having a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant, and cut off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. So Jesus said to Peter, "Put your sword into the sheath. Shall I not drink the cup which my Father has given me?"
Okay. There's a lot about this story that reminds us of the Gethsemane experience in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, but it's quite different as well. And let me share some of the differences here. I wrote them down because there's so many. First of all, it's in a garden. Matthew and Mark say Gethsemane. Luke simply says they went to the Mount of Olives. So all of that is true, but they each focus on a different thing. John tells us they went there often. The others don't say that. He tells us that Judas knew the place. He mentions that there are detachments of soldiers with the crowd. The others just talk about a mob that comes, sort of a street riot. Here you have Roman soldiers. I mean, this is an official gathering. Notice there's no agony, no Gethsemane anguish. Jesus doesn't separate to pray. John leaves out a lot of things that the others cover. There's no kiss from Judas. Judas just shows up with the army. Notice that Jesus says, "I am," again, ego eimi. I am the one you're looking for. I am Jesus of Nazareth, you see. Peter and Malchus are named here. It only says in the others that there's a disciple who strikes the high priest's servant, cuts off the ear. Notice Jesus doesn't heal it in this story. And Jesus asks for the disciples' release. So those are all details that Matthew, Mark, and Luke don't have. What's the point? What's the difference? Matthew, Mark, and Luke emphasize the anguish of Jesus in the garden. John emphasizes almost the opposite. He is in control. Jesus is fully in control of the situation. In a way, I think it is John picking up on chapter 10, verse 18, where he says, "I lay down my life of my own accord." Jesus makes clear that it's a voluntary death, that he is allowing himself to be taken. He is allowing himself to be tried. He's allowing himself to be nailed to the cross. He's allowing himself to be killed. This is a voluntary act. This is a deliberate choice on the part of God. He's in full control of the situation. It isn't Judas that controls the situation. It's not Judas's kiss that controls the situation. But Peter has the opposite view. He thinks it's out of control. And the very actions Peter takes to get it under control are actually a problem, because they undermine Jesus' argument to Pilate later on, as we will see. So Jesus, in trying to get control of the situation, and Peter, in trying to get control of the situation, actually messes it up, makes it worse. Ever happen in your life? You ever feel like everything's out of control? And instead of sometimes giving ourselves to God and letting Him be in control of the situation. We try to fix it ourselves. I think that's what many religions do. They see problems and they try to fix the problems rather than getting in line with God's purpose for the situation. To God, there's always a purpose. There's always control. But Jesus, even going to the cross, is in control of the situation.
Well, friends, we are studying the Gospel of John, and stay with us as we pick up on this chapter 18.